The Buddha once said that the mind is like the open sky, always vast, always clear, only hidden by passing clouds. Take a deep breath now, and as you exhale, imagine those clouds drifting away. Find your most comfortable way to listen, maybe lying still with eyes closed, or sitting in quiet reflection as the world softens around you. Tonight's stories will help you look beyond the clouds. They are not rules to follow, but invitations to return to your own clear sky of awareness. Before we begin, share where you are listening from, or what feeling lives in your heart right now. Maybe gratitude, maybe sorrow, maybe peace slowly forming, like light at dawn. Breathe once more, softly and completely. And now our story begins. In a coastal village where dangerous rocks lurked beneath the waves, there stood a lighthouse that had saved countless ships from destruction. The lighthouse keeper was a man named Tomo, who had tended the light faithfully for 20 years, never missing a night, never letting the beacon fail. Tomo took great pride in his work. Each evening as he lit the lamp, he would think about the ships that would see his light and know where the safe passage lay. He imagined grateful sailors steering clear of the rocks because of his vigilance. His purpose was clear, his contribution visible, his worth measured in ships that arrived safely rather than wrecking on the shore. But then came a period in Tomo's life when everything fell apart. His wife died after a long illness. His adult son, with whom he'd been close, moved to a distant city and rarely wrote. His closest friend in the village passed away suddenly. Within the span of 6 months, Tomo lost everyone who mattered most to him. He fell into a deep despair. He no longer felt the satisfaction he once had in his work. The lighthouse seemed meaningless, his life empty, his purpose hollow. He felt lost, as if he were stumbling through darkness with no light to guide him, no sense of direction, no hope that things would improve. Yet, despite his inner darkness, Tomo continued to light the lighthouse every night. It was a habit, a duty, the automatic continuation of what he had always done. But there was no joy in it anymore, no sense of meaning. He lit the lamp because that's what lighthouse keepers do, not because he felt it mattered. He would stand in the lamp room at night, watching the light sweep across the dark water, and think, I'm supposed to be the one providing light, but I'm drowning in darkness. I'm supposed to guide others to safety, but I'm completely lost in myself. What right do I have to stand here pretending to know the way when I can't find my own path? One stormy night, as Tomo stood in the lamp room feeling particularly hopeless, there was a knock at the lighthouse door. He descended to find a sailor, soaking wet, nearly hypothermic, who had been thrown from his ship when a wave swept over the deck. I saw your light, the sailor gasped as Tomo pulled him inside. I was in the water, being pulled toward the rocks. I thought I was going to die. Then I saw your light, and I swam toward it. Your light saved my life. Tomo brought the man warm clothes, hot tea, and blankets. As the sailor recovered by the fire, he kept repeating his gratitude. If your light hadn't been there, I would have been smashed against the rocks. I couldn't see anything else, but I could see your light. It showed me which way to swim. After the sailor left the next morning, rescued by his ship, which had returned looking for him, Tomo sat for a long time thinking about what had happened. He had been so focused on his own inner darkness that he had forgotten what his light actually did. It didn't require him to feel enlightened. It didn't need him to be free of darkness himself. It just needed to shine. The sailor didn't care that the lighthouse keeper was lost and grieving. The sailor didn't need Tomo to have all the answers or to be living a perfect life. The sailor just needed the light to be there, marking the safe passage, showing where the dangers were. A Zen monk who lived at the village had heard about the rescued sailor. He came to visit Tomo at the lighthouse. "I've noticed you've been struggling," the monk said gently. "Since your losses, I see the darkness in you." Tomo nodded, too tired to pretend otherwise. "I light this beacon every night, but I feel like a fraud. How can I guide others when I'm lost myself? How can I provide light when I'm full of darkness?" The monk looked up at the lamp tower. "Does the lighthouse need to understand navigation to be useful? Does it need to have sailed all the seas to show where the rocks are? Does it need to feel happy and fulfilled to save lives?" "No," Tomo admitted. "It just needs to shine." "Exactly," the monk said. "You think your inner darkness disqualifies you from helping others, but actually, your willingness to keep the light burning despite your darkness makes your service even more valuable. You're not helping others because you have everything figured out. You're helping them because you do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel." He touched Tomo's shoulder. Many people believe they can't help others until they're completely healed themselves. Until they've solved all their problems, found all their answers, achieved enlightenment or happiness or wholeness. But if everyone waited until they were completely well before helping others, no one would ever help anyone. We're all broken in some way. We're all stumbling in the darkness of one kind or another. But we can still hold lights for each other. Tomo felt something shift inside him. "You're saying I can be lost and still guide others?" "You already are," the monk replied. "You've been doing it every night. Your grief, your despair, your sense of being lost, none of that prevented the light from shining. None of that stopped you from doing what needed to be done. You think you're a fraud because you're suffering while helping others. But actually, you're demonstrating something important. Service doesn't require personal perfection. It requires showing up and doing what needs to be done." Over the following weeks, Tomo began to see his work differently. He was still grieving. He still felt lost much of the time. The darkness inside him hadn't disappeared. But he understood now that his inner state didn't invalidate his outer contribution. Ships still needed guidance. The light still saved lives. His pain didn't make the light less bright. He thought about all the people who probably felt as he did, broken, lost, inadequate, questioning their right to help others when they themselves were struggling. How many people stopped offering their gifts because they felt they weren't whole enough, healed enough, enlightened enough? A young woman from the village came to him one day troubled. She was training to be a healer, but felt overwhelmed by her own anxieties and doubts. "How can I help heal others when I'm so broken myself?" she asked. Tomo took her up to the lamp room and showed her the light. This lighthouse doesn't need to be whole to be useful. It just needs to do its job. You don't need to have conquered all your fears and healed all your wounds to help others. You just need to offer what you can offer. Your brokenness doesn't disqualify you from service. Sometimes it actually makes you better at it because you understand suffering from the inside. He told her about the sailor he had saved while feeling completely lost. The sailor didn't need me to be happy. He needed me to keep the light on. The people you help won't need you to be perfect. They'll need you to offer your skills, your compassion, your presence, whatever you're capable of giving. And you can give those things even while you're struggling. Word spread about the lighthouse keeper's teaching. People who had been holding back from helping others because of their own problems began to reconsider. The teacher who was battling depression realized she could still teach well, that her students didn't need her to be joyful, just knowledgeable and present. The counselor struggling with his own failed marriage recognized he could still help other couples, that his challenges didn't erase his insights. The mentor, dealing with doubt about his own life choices, saw that he could still guide younger people. That uncertainty about his own path didn't prevent him from illuminating options for others. Tomoe's grief gradually softened over time. Years passed, and while he never stopped missing his wife and feeling the absence of his son, the acute pain dulled into a quieter sadness. The darkness inside him became less consuming. But he never forgot the lesson of that period, that he had kept the light burning through his darkest time, that ships had been saved even while he felt lost, that his inner darkness hadn't stopped the outward light. One evening, many years later, an old sailor came to the lighthouse. "Do you remember me?" the sailor asked. "You saved my life 20 years ago. I was thrown overboard in a storm. I saw your light and swam to it." Tomoe did remember. That was the night I needed most to know that what I was doing mattered. "Well, it mattered," the sailor said. "I went on to have a family. 3 children, 7 grandchildren now. All of them exist because you kept that light burning. And you know what I learned that night? I learned that when you're drowning in darkness, you don't need someone who has all the answers. You just need someone who's holding a light, even if they're struggling to hold it, even if they're not sure why they're bothering. You just need the light. It doesn't matter if the keeper is lost. It matters that the light is there." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what lights you've been withholding because you feel too broken to offer them. What help have you refused to give because you don't feel qualified, whole, or enlightened enough? What guidance have you withheld because you yourself feel lost? You don't need to have everything figured out to help someone else. You don't need to be healed completely to offer healing. You don't need to be free of darkness to hold light for others. The lighthouse keeper's inner darkness didn't stop ships from being saved. Your inner struggles don't invalidate the contribution you can make. Keep your light burning, even in your dark nights. Not because you're perfect, but because someone out there is swimming in darkness toward whatever light they can find. Your light might be the one that saves them. And it doesn't matter that you feel lost. It only matters that you're still showing up, still doing what you can do, still offering what you can offer. Rest now in the understanding that you can be broken and still be useful, lost and still guide others, full of darkness and still provides light. The lighthouse doesn't need to understand the journey to mark the safe passage. It just needs to keep shining. So do you. Your inner darkness doesn't disqualify you from helping others. Sometimes it's what qualifies you most. because you understand what it's like to need a light in the darkness. Sleep now, lighthouse keeper, knowing that even in your darkest nights, your light has been saving lives. It always has been. It always will be. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In a valley between two mountain ranges, there was a river that confused everyone who saw it. Most rivers in the region flowed from high elevations to low, following gravity as rivers should. But this river appeared to run uphill, flowing from what looked like lower ground to higher ground, defying logic and nature. Villagers argued about the river for generations. Some said it was cursed, that supernatural forces made it run backwards. Others insisted it was an optical illusion, that the river only appeared to run uphill but actually didn't. A few claimed the river was evidence of magic in the world, proof that natural laws could be suspended. A scholar named Fumiko came to study the peculiar river. She was a woman who trusted observation over superstition, who believed that understanding came from careful study rather than easy assumptions. She spent weeks walking the river's length, taking measurements, making careful notes. What she discovered was unexpected. The river wasn't running uphill at all, though it certainly appeared to be. The optical illusion was created by the unusual topology of the valley. The way surrounding hills created a visual context that made lower ground appear higher and higher ground appear lower. When you adjusted for this visual distortion and looked at actual elevations, the river was flowing downhill as it should, following gravity perfectly. But there was a second discovery, more interesting than the first. There was a short section where the river actually did flow uphill, pushed by an underground spring with such force that it created a brief reversal of normal flow before gravity took over again. This wasn't magic or curse, it was hydrology, underground pressure overcoming gravity temporarily. A natural phenomenon that looked miraculous only because people didn't understand the forces involved. Fumiko shared her findings with the villagers, explaining the optical illusion and the underground spring. Some villagers were relieved to have the mystery explained. Others were disappointed. They had preferred the magical explanation to the scientific one. But an old farmer named Gonji said something that made Fumiko reconsider what she thought she'd discovered. "The river teaches something important," Gonji said. "It teaches that things can look completely wrong while being completely right. That what appears to violate natural laws might just be responding to forces we don't understand yet." He pointed to his fields. "I plant crops that other farmers say won't grow in this soil. They say I'm working against nature, that I should plant what everyone plants. But I've learned that this soil has properties they don't understand. That what looks like wrong farming is actually right farming for these specific conditions." Fumiko thought about this. She had explained the river's apparent backwards flow, but Gonji was suggesting something deeper, that the river taught people to question their assumptions about what's natural, what's possible, what's right. The river looked wrong, but was responding perfectly to actual conditions, both the optical conditions that made flow appear backwards, and the geological conditions that briefly pushed water uphill. "You're saying the river teaches us to look deeper before judging?" Fumiko asked. "More than that," Gonji replied. It teaches us that backwards and forwards depend on what forces you're aware of. To someone who only knows gravity, water flowing uphill is impossible, wrong, against nature. But to someone who understands underground pressure, water flowing uphill is perfectly natural, a correct response to present forces. He gestured to the river. How many things in life look wrong because we're only seeing some of the forces involved? How many people are judged for going against the flow when they're actually responding to forces others can't see? Over the following months, Fumiko expanded her study. She began collecting stories of things that appeared to violate natural expectations, but actually didn't. They just responded to forces that weren't immediately obvious. A tree growing bent at a strange angle because of prevailing winds that had since died down. A flower blooming in winter because of an underground hot spring. A bird flying inland before storms because it sensed pressure changes humans couldn't detect. Each example taught the same lesson. What appears wrong might be responding perfectly to reality, while what appears right might be ignorant of important forces. A young mother came to Fumiko with a problem. My son won't follow the path I've set for him. He's going backwards from where he should go, against everything natural and right. How do I make him flow the right direction? Tell me about your son, Fumiko said. The mother described a boy who refused to take over the family business, who wanted instead to become a traveling musician. It's backwards, she insisted. Children should continue family work. That's the natural flow. He's going against nature. Or he's responding to forces you're not seeing, Fumiko suggested gently. Is he talented musically? Very, but that's not the point. Talent doesn't change duty. Doesn't it? Fumiko asked. The river appears to flow backwards because of forces beneath the surface. Perhaps your son is flowing in a direction that looks backwards to you, but is actually responding to forces inside him, talents, passions, purposes that you can't see or don't value. Just because his flow doesn't match your expectations doesn't mean it's wrong. She told the mother about the river, about how it appeared to defy nature, but actually followed it perfectly when all forces were considered. Your son might be like that river. What looks like backwards rebellion might be forward movement towards something he's meant to do. The question isn't whether he's flowing the way you expected, but whether he's flowing true to himself. This conversation troubled the mother, but she began to observe her son differently. She noticed how music seemed to flow from him naturally, how he came alive when playing, how his path, though different from hers, had its own rightness to it. Eventually, though it was difficult, she accepted that his backwards path might be his right path. Word spread about Fumiko's teachings about the backwards river. People began using it as a way to reconsider their own judgments. When someone's path looked wrong, they would ask, am I seeing all the forces involved? Or am I judging based on incomplete understanding? A magistrate applied this thinking to a legal case. A man had broken a law, but when the magistrate investigated deeper, he found forces that explained the law-breaking in a way that changed the judgment entirely. The man wasn't defying order. He was responding to a greater order that the law itself hadn't anticipated. A teacher applied it to a student who learned differently from others. Instead of judging the student as backwards or wrong, the teacher looked for the forces, the different cognitive patterns, the unique intelligences that made the student's apparently backwards approach actually forward for him. Years later, Fumiko's study of the backwards river had become famous beyond the valley. She was invited to give lectures, to advise rulers, to teach scholars. But she always returned to the river itself, watching its apparently impossible flow, using it to remind herself that understanding requires humility, that what appears wrong might be right in ways she hasn't yet grasped. A visiting philosopher asked her, "But aren't some things actually wrong? Doesn't your river teaching lead to excusing everything, to saying nothing is really backwards because we just don't understand the forces?" "No," Fumiko replied carefully. "Some things are genuinely wrong. They're responding to destructive forces like cruelty or ignorance or selfishness. The river teaches discernment, not relativism. It teaches us to look for forces we might not see before judging, but after looking, we still make judgments. The difference is, our judgments are informed by deeper understanding rather than surface appearance." She pointed to the river. "This river looks backwards, but isn't. But if a farmer tried to make his irrigation flow uphill without underground spring pressure, that would be genuinely backwards, genuinely wrong. The teaching isn't that everything is right. The teaching is that apparent wrongness requires investigation before judgment. Some backwards flows are responding to forces we need to understand. Others are just backwards." Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider things in your life that appear backwards or wrong. Your own path that doesn't match expectations. Other people's choices that confuse you. Circumstances that seem to violate how things should be. Before judging these as wrong, ask, what forces might I not be seeing? What underground pressures might be pushing flow in directions that look impossible, but are actually perfectly natural? The backwards river teaches humility in judgment, curiosity before conclusion, openness to forces you don't yet understand. Not everything that looks wrong is right, but some things that look wrong are responding to reality more accurately than things that look right. The only way to know is to look deeper, to consider forces beyond the obvious, to remain humble about the limits of your understanding. Rest now in acceptance of apparent backwards flows in yourself and others. Let the river run its course, responding to all the forces acting on it, both visible and hidden. Trust that what looks impossible might be possible, that what seems backwards might be forward, that nature is wiser than our quick judgments about what's natural. The river knows where it's going, even when it appears to go the wrong way. There was a poet named Ren who had written beautiful poems for many years. His words flowed easily, and people treasured his work. But one season, the words stopped coming. Ren would sit before blank paper, brush ready, ink prepared, and nothing would emerge. Day after day, week after week, the page remained empty. He tried everything. He read other poets' work, hoping for inspiration. He visited beautiful places, seeking images to capture. He forced himself to write, producing words that felt dead and hollow. Nothing worked. The emptiness persisted. Ren fell into despair. He believed he had lost his gift, that whatever spring of poetry had lived within him had dried up. He was no longer a poet, just someone sitting before blank pages, producing nothing. A Zen monk named Sengai heard of Ren's struggle and came to visit. He found the poet sitting in his study, surrounded by blank papers, looking defeated. "I can't write," Ren said. "The words are gone. I'm empty." Sengai picked up one of the blank pages, examining it carefully. "This paper looks full to me." Ren frowned. "It's completely blank. It's empty. That's the problem." "Is it?" Sengai held the page up to the light. "I see infinite possibilities on this page. I see every poem ever written and every poem yet to be written. I see your past work and your future work. This blank page contains everything. How can you call it empty?" "Those are just potential poems," Ren protested. "Not actual poems. Potential is nothing. I need actual words." Sengai set down the paper gently. "Tell me, before you write a poem, where does it exist?" "In my mind, I suppose. Or in my imagination." "And is that nothing? Is a poem that exists in imagination less real than a poem on paper? Or is it just a different form of the same thing?" Ren started to answer, then stopped. He wasn't sure. "The blank page is not the absence of poetry," Sengai continued. "It's poetry in its unmanifested form, the silence before the song, the stillness before the dance. You're calling it empty because you can't see it yet. But perhaps it's more full than any written page, because it contains all possibilities rather than one actuality." He moved to the window, looking out at Ren's garden. "In winter, your garden looks dead. Empty. But is it? Or is spring simply waiting, gathering itself, preparing? You wouldn't curse the winter garden for not being summer. You trust that the emptiness is part of the cycle. Why can't you trust that your blank pages are also part of the cycle?" Over the following days, Ren sat with this teaching. Instead of fighting the blankness, trying to force it to become fullness, he simply sat with it. He looked at blank pages not as failures, but as potential. He experienced his internal emptiness not as loss, but as space. And slowly, something shifted. The emptiness began to feel different, not empty, but full of possibility, not lacking, but pregnant with what might emerge. He stopped trying to write and simply sat with a blank page, befriending it, accepting it. One morning, without force or effort, words came. Not many, just a few lines, but they felt true in a way his forced writing hadn't. They emerged from the emptiness rather than being imposed upon it. The blank page had given birth naturally, rather than being violated by his demand. Ren's poetry changed after this period. It had more space in it, more silence between words. Critics said it had deepened, become more profound. Ren knew it was because he had learned to value emptiness as much as fullness, to see the blank page not as an enemy, but as a teacher. When young poets came to him struggling with their own blank pages, their own dry periods, Ren would tell them, "Don't curse the emptiness. Don't fight the blank page. Emptiness is not the absence of poetry. It's poetry gathering itself. It's the fullness before it manifests. Trust it. Sit with it. Let it fill you in ways that words never could. The blank page is not nothing. It's everything waiting. Tonight, let yourself be blank. Let your mind be the empty page, not filled with thoughts and plans and worries. Don't see this emptiness as a lack. See it as fullness waiting, as possibility gathering, as the silence before the song. You don't need to fill every moment with content. The empty moments are just as important, just as full in their own way. Rest in emptiness. It's not nothing. It's everything you need, waiting to emerge when the time is right. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountain village, there lived a woman named Sayuri who had a reputation as an oracle. People would travel from distant places to seek her wisdom on important decisions. Should I marry this person? Should I pursue this business opportunity? Should I move to a new city? But Sayuri had an unusual way of responding to questions. She never gave direct answers. Instead, she would reply with more questions. A merchant came to her asking, "Should I invest in this new trade route?" Sayuri replied, "What would make that investment right for you? What would make it wrong? Which outcome could you live with more easily?" The merchant, frustrated, pressed her. "But what do you think I should do? Why does my opinion matter more than yours?" Sayuri asked. "You know your circumstances, your resources, your risk tolerance. I don't. How could my answer be better than the answer you would reach by examining your own wisdom?" People found this approach maddening. They wanted clear guidance, definite answers, someone to tell them what to do. Instead, Sayuri gave them questions that turned their attention inward. A young woman came asking whether she should accept a marriage proposal. "The man is suitable," she explained. "My family approves. But I feel uncertain." "What is the uncertainty?" Sayuri asked. "I don't know if I love him enough." "What is enough love for marriage?" Sayuri inquired. "Who defines that measure? And more importantly, what does your uncertainty tell you?" The young woman sat with these questions. Slowly, she realized she already knew her answer. The uncertainty wasn't confusion. It was clear trying to be heard beneath the noise of expectations and social pressure. She didn't want to marry this man. She had known it all along, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. "You already had your answer," Sayuri said when the woman expressed this realization. "You just needed permission to hear it. If I had told you what to do, you would have either resented me for the advice or become dependent on me for future decisions. But by asking questions, I helped you find your own wisdom. Now you trust yourself more than you did before." A farmer came with a more desperate question. His crops were failing, and he needed to decide whether to borrow money to try new methods or sell his land and find other work. "Please," he begged, "just tell me what to do. I can't decide." "What happens if you borrow and the new methods fail?" Sayuri asked. "I lose everything." "What happens if you sell the land?" "I lose my family's heritage, but I avoid debt." "Which loss could you live with?" Sayuri continued. "Losing everything, including your dignity, through failed debt? Or losing your land but keeping your freedom from debt? Which regret would be smaller?" The farmer thought deeply. He realized that he valued security over heritage. The land was important, but being debt-free was more important. Once he saw this clearly, his decision became obvious. "But what if I'm wrong?" he asked Sayuri. "What if you're right?" she countered. "Why assume the wrong choice is more likely than the right one? And even if you choose poorly, will you learn something? Will you adapt? Or will you be paralyzed forever by fear of making mistakes?" These questions shifted something in the farmer. He had been treating the decision as if one choice was absolutely right and the other absolutely wrong. But Sayuri's questions helped him see that both choices had consequences. Both involved trade-offs, and he needed to decide based on his values, not on some objective standard of rightness. Word spread about Sayuri's approach. Some people avoided her, frustrated that she wouldn't just give answers. But many sought her out precisely because she didn't. They recognized that her questions were a kind of teaching, helping them develop their own wisdom rather than borrowing hers. A Zen monk visited Sayuri, curious about her method. "You could make a good living telling people what to do," he observed. "They want certainty. They would pay well for it. Why do you refuse to give it?" "Because certainty from outside is false security," Sayuri replied. "If I tell someone what to do and it works out, they credit me and become dependent on me for future decisions. If it doesn't work out, they blame me and still haven't learned to trust themselves. Either way, I've made them weaker, not stronger." She poured tea for them both. But when I ask questions that help them find their own answers, they become stronger. They learn to consult their own wisdom. They develop confidence in their decision-making. Even if they choose poorly, they learn from their own mistakes rather than blaming someone else. The monk nodded thoughtfully. "Your questions are a form of teaching. You're not withholding wisdom. You're pointing people toward the wisdom they already possess." "Exactly," Sayuri agreed. "Most people have more wisdom than they realize. They just don't trust it. They've been taught to look outside themselves for answers, to defer to authorities, to doubt their own judgment. My questions permit them to trust what they already know." She looked at the monk directly. "The same is true in meditation practice, isn't it? A good teacher doesn't give you enlightenment. They ask questions or create situations that help you recognize what's already there. The wisdom isn't imported from outside. It's revealed from within." "Yes," the monk agreed. "The best teaching is the teaching that makes itself unnecessary by helping students trust their own understanding." Years passed, and Sayuri grew old. People worried about who would replace her as the village oracle. But Sayuri refused to train a successor. "I haven't been giving answers," she said. "I've been asking questions." "Anyone can do that. You don't need a special oracle. You need to practice asking yourselves better questions." She taught the village a method. When facing a decision, ask yourself questions instead of seeking immediate answers. What do I value most in this situation? What outcome could I live with most easily? What does my hesitation tell me? What would I advise a friend in this situation? What do I already know that I'm afraid to acknowledge? These questions, Sayuri explained, are tools for excavating your own wisdom. The answers are already in you. You just need to dig them out from under the layers of fear, expectation, and conditioning. On her deathbed, surrounded by villagers who had come to thank her for her guidance over the years, someone asked, "Sayuri, what is the most important question?" Even then, she smiled and replied with a question. "What question would help you most right now? And when you've answered that, what question would help you next?" The most important question is always the one that moves you deeper into your own understanding. Tonight, as you rest, what questions might you ask yourself? Not demanding answers, not forcing resolution, just inquiring gently into your own experience. What am I feeling right now? What do I need in this moment? What wisdom am I carrying that I haven't yet listened to? What am I afraid to acknowledge? You don't need someone else's answers. You don't need an oracle or expert to tell you what to do, how to feel, who to be. The wisdom is already in you, has always been in you, waiting for the right questions to draw it out. Ask yourself questions tonight and listen for the answers that rise from your own depths. They're more trustworthy than anything someone else could tell you. Rest now in your own wisdom, asking and listening, questioning and discovering. The oracle you seek is you. In a garden temple, the monks kept a beautiful crane named Haku in a large bamboo enclosure. Haku had been brought to the temple as an injured chick, nursed back to health, and raised in the enclosure where he was safe from predators and provided with ample food. For 3 years, Haku lived comfortably in his bamboo home. The monks fed him daily, cleaned his space, and even spoke to him in gentle tones. He had everything a crane could need except freedom, though the monks assured themselves they were keeping him safe. One day, a traveling priest named Osho visited the temple and saw Haku in his enclosure. The priest noticed that Haku's wings had grown strong and full. He was clearly capable of flight, yet he never attempted to fly beyond the bamboo walls, even though portions of the enclosure were open to the sky. "Why doesn't your crane fly away?" Osho asked the monks. "He could if he wanted to," one monk replied. "We don't clip his wings." But he stays because he knows this is where his food comes, where he's safe, where he belongs. Osho watched Haku for several days. The crane would walk around his enclosure, occasionally stretching his wings, but never attempting actual flight. It was as if Haku had forgotten that flight was even possible, that his wings had any purpose beyond stretching. On his last day at the temple, Osho asked permission to enter Haku's enclosure. He approached the crane slowly, then suddenly clapped his hands and shouted, startling Haku into the air. The crane's wings opened instinctively, and for a moment, Haku was flying, truly flying, circling above the enclosure in surprise. But after only 2 circles, Haku landed back in his familiar corner, as if the brief flight had frightened rather than thrilled him. He settled back into his routine immediately, walking the same worn paths he always walked. The monks were angry. "You scared him! You could have hurt him!" "I showed him he could fly," Osho replied calmly, "but he chose to land. That choice tells me something important. Your crane is imprisoned not by bamboo walls, but by comfort. He could leave any time, but he won't, because the enclosure has become more familiar than freedom." He looked at the monks gathered around him. And before you judge Haku too harshly, ask yourselves, how are you different? How many of you are living in comfortable enclosures of your own making, never attempting to fly because the familiar is safer than the possible? One young monk, named Botan, was particularly struck by this question. He realized he had been at the temple for 5 years, had taken preliminary vows, but had never fully committed to the monastic life. He was comfortable in this in-between state, receiving the structure and security of monastery life without the full commitment it demanded. Like Haku, he had wings he never used. After Osho left, Botan couldn't stop thinking about the crane. He began to see Haku differently, not as a bird being kept safe, but as a bird being kept comfortable in a cage he could leave any time. And he began to see himself the same way. He started paying attention to all the ways the monastery had become his comfortable enclosure. He knew when every meal would come. He knew exactly what each day would bring. He had routines that felt safe, relationships that felt predictable, a life that felt controlled. And he realized this comfort was preventing him from attempting the flight that monastic life was actually meant to enable. The leap into full commitment, into genuine spiritual practice, into the risk and uncertainty that real transformation requires. "I've been living like Haku," Botan confessed to the abbot. "Safe and comfortable, but not really alive. Not really practicing, just walking the same familiar paths day after day." The abbot, who'd been troubled by Osho's words about the crane, nodded. "You're not alone." Many of us have made the monastery into a comfortable cage rather than a launching place. We've mistaken security for wisdom, routine for practice, comfort for peace. He gestured toward Haku's enclosure. The priest was right to startle the crane into flight. Not to frighten him, but to remind him what his wings were for. Perhaps we all need to be startled sometimes, reminded that we have wings we're not using, capabilities we're not exercising, flights we're not attempting, because the ground feels safer. The monks began to look at their own lives with new eyes. They noticed patterns of comfortable avoidance, ways they stayed safely within self-imposed limits, flights they could attempt but didn't. The monastery, meant to be a place of transformation, had become for many a place of comfortable stagnation. Gradually, changes began to happen. Monks who had been avoiding difficult practices began to attempt them. Commitments that had been postponed were made. Risks that had seemed too frightening were taken. Not everyone changed. Some preferred the comfortable enclosure, but many discovered they had wings they had forgotten about. As for Haku, the monks began to encourage him to fly, taking him to open areas and gently startling him into the air. At first, he would fly only briefly before landing back in familiar territory, but eventually, his flights grew longer. One day, Haku flew beyond the temple grounds entirely and didn't return. The monks felt both loss and joy. They had loved having Haku, but they recognized that keeping him comfortable had been keeping him caged. Setting him free, truly free, not just free within limits, was the compassionate thing, even though it meant losing him. Botan, watching Haku disappear into the distance, felt inspired. If a crane can remember how to fly after 3 years of comfortable captivity, then surely I can remember what I came here to do. I've been in my bamboo enclosure long enough. He took his final vows that week, fully committing to monastic life. It was terrifying in a way his comfortable half-commitment had never been. But it was also exhilarating, like stretching wings he had forgotten he possessed. Years later, when Botan had become a teacher, he would often tell the story of Haku the crane. "We all build comfortable enclosures," he would say. "Relationships that feel safe but limit growth. Jobs that provide security but prevent exploration. Routines that feel comforting but cage us. The bamboo walls look like protection, but they're actually prevention, preventing us from discovering what we're capable of, from attempting flights we were made for." Students would ask, but how do we know when comfort has become a cage? When should we leave the enclosure? When you're walking the same paths day after day without growth, Botan would reply. When you've stopped even looking at the sky. when you've forgotten you have wings, when the thought of flying fills you with fear rather than excitement. These are signs that comfort has become captivity, that the safe enclosure has become a prison you don't recognize as a prison because it's comfortable. He would pause, then add, "The tragedy isn't being in the enclosure. The tragedy is forgetting you can leave, forgetting you were made for flight, forgetting that your wings have purpose beyond stretching." Haku lived 3 years in comfortable captivity before someone reminded him he could fly. How many years will you live in yours before you remember? Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own bamboo enclosure. What comfortable cage have you built for yourself? What safe patterns have you established that prevent growth? What flights are you not attempting because staying grounded feels safer? You have wings. You've always had wings. The question isn't whether you're capable of flight. You are. The question is whether you've become so comfortable with the ground that you've forgotten that the sky is where you belong. Whether the bamboo enclosure feels so safe that you've stopped noticing it's still an enclosure. Rest tonight with this awareness. Tomorrow, you could fly. You could attempt something that terrifies you. You could leave the comfortable patterns and risk the unknown. You could stretch your wings, not just as exercise, but as preparation for actual flight. The cage isn't locked. It never was. You've just been comfortable enough that you forgot to try the door. Sleep now and dream of flying. Let some part of you remember what your wings are for. And when you wake, maybe, just maybe, you'll be ready to find out what happens when you actually use them. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. In a temple nestled among bamboo groves, there burned a single candle that had been lit from a flame kept burning for 300 years. Each night, the temple keeper would light a new candle from the old one before it burned down completely, ensuring the ancient flame continued without interruption. The current temple keeper was a young monk named Daichi who had inherited this duty from his teacher. Each evening, he would perform the ritual mechanically, barely paying attention. Light the new candle, let the old one burn out, and return to his other tasks. It seemed like such a simple, repetitive chore. One evening, as Daichi prepared to light the new candle from the old, his teacher appeared beside him. "Watch the flame," his teacher said quietly. Daichi watched. The candle had burned nearly to its base. The flame flickered, small and delicate, drawing on the last of the wax. "This flame has only moments left," his teacher continued. "Soon it will go out. Does knowing this change how you see it?" Daichi looked more carefully. The flame seemed somehow more beautiful now, more precious. Each flicker felt significant, knowing there were only a few left. "All things are like this candle," his teacher said. "Every moment is burning down. Every conversation is closer to its end. Every day of your life is drawing on a finite supply. But we forget this. We act as if we have unlimited time, unlimited candles, unlimited moments. So we waste them. We don't pay attention. We think there will always be another chance." He gestured to the dying flame. But this candle knows differently. It burns fully, completely, holding nothing back. because it has nothing to hold back for. It gives all its light right now, not saving some for later, because there is no later. This is its teaching. The old candle burned down to nothing. The flame vanished. Daiichi lit the new candle, transferring the ancient fire. "That flame you just saw will never exist again," his teacher said. "That particular dance of light and heat is gone forever. You witnessed its final moments. Did you honor them? Did you see them fully? Or were you already thinking about the next candle?" From that evening forward, Daiichi's relationship with the nightly ritual changed completely. He began to watch each candle burn with full attention. He noticed how each flame was unique, how it moved differently, how the light it cast created particular shadows that would never be exactly recreated. He began to see that everything in his life was like the candle. His conversations with the other monks were burning down toward their eventual end. His time in this temple was limited. His life itself was a candle burning, each day consuming some portion of a finite supply. This awareness didn't make him sad. Instead, it made him present. When he swept the courtyard, he swept with full attention, knowing that someday he would sweep it for the last time. When he ate, he tasted his food completely, knowing that each meal was unrepeatable. When he spoke with someone, he listened fully, knowing that every conversation was precious and finite. Other monks noticed the change in Daiichi. He seemed more alive somehow, more engaged, more appreciative of ordinary moments. "What happened to you?" a fellow monk asked. "You seem different." Daiichi smiled. "I learned to see endings," he said. "Not as sad things, but as teachers. When you know something will end, you treasure it. When you remember you're burning down like a candle, you stop saving your light for later and burn fully now." Years later, when Daiichi became the head teacher of the temple, he would bring students to witness the nightly lighting of the candles. He would make them watch the old candle's final moments, really watch, giving those last flickers of light their full attention. "This is how to live," he would tell them. "Not by pretending you'll last forever, but by remembering you won't. Not by fearing the end, but by letting the end teach you how precious the middle is. Burn fully. Give your light completely. Hold nothing back. Because like this candle, you have no guarantee of another moment beyond this one." Tonight, as you settle into rest, you might remember that this day has ended. It burned down moment by moment, and now it's gone. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. This moment, right now, is all you truly have. Does this awareness make you anxious? Or does it help you let go, knowing that clinging serves no purpose when everything is temporary? Does it make you sad? Or does it help you appreciate what's here while it's here? You are a candle burning, not slowly dying, but fully living, giving your light completely in each moment. And that light, however long it lasts, is enough. Rest now in the preciousness of this fleeting moment, this temporary life, this beautiful flame that burns brightly precisely because it doesn't last forever. In a mountain village famous for its textiles, there was a master weaver named Chio who created cloth of extraordinary beauty. Her patterns were intricate, her colors perfectly balanced, her technique flawless. People would travel for days to commission work from her loom, and her pieces hung in the homes of nobles throughout the province. Then, One winter morning, Chiyo woke to find her hands had stiffened with arthritis. The pain was intense, but worse was the loss of the fine motor control that her craft demanded. She could no longer work the shuttle with her usual precision. The delicate adjustments that created her signature patterns were now impossible. For a weaver, this seemed like a death sentence. Chiyo's entire identity, her life's work, her purpose, all depended on her hands. Now those hands betrayed her, refusing to do what she commanded. She sat before her loom for hours, weeping, unable to imagine a future without her craft. Days turned to weeks. The loom sat silent. Chiyo refused visitors, refused commissions, refused to even look at the beautiful threads that had once brought her such joy. Her apprentice, a young woman named Nao, came regularly, begging Chiyo to teach her, to at least pass on knowledge if she could no longer create. But Chiyo sent her away each time. "What's the point?" she would say. "Without my hands, I have nothing to teach. I am nothing." One day, Nao arrived with a request that Chiyo couldn't refuse. A small child from the village was sick, and his mother had asked if Chiyo might weave even a simple cloth for the child's comfort. "She doesn't expect your fine work," Nao said gently. "She just wants something made by you, even if it's rough. She believes your cloth has healing in it." Chiyo couldn't say no to a sick child, so she returned to her loom for the first time in months. Her stiff hands struggled with the shuttle. The tension was uneven. The pattern she attempted came out distorted. Everything her hands produced now was clumsy, imperfect, wrong. But she continued, driven by compassion for the child. She created a simple blanket, nothing like her former masterpieces. The weave was loose, the pattern irregular, the whole piece marked by the limitations of her arthritic hands. She wrapped it with shame, certain the mother would be disappointed. When Nao delivered the blanket, the mother held it and began to cry. "It's perfect," she said. "Tell Chiyo it's the most beautiful thing she's ever made." Nao brought this message back to Chiyo, who couldn't believe it. How could that rough, imperfect work be beautiful? "It's everything I spent my life learning not to create." The mother said she could feel the struggle in it, Nao reported. She said she could feel your hands fighting to create something despite the pain. She said it reminded her that beautiful things can emerge from difficulty, that limitation doesn't mean the end of creation. Her child is struggling too, and she said this cloth would remind him that struggle can still produce beauty. This response shook something loose in Chiyo's understanding. She had thought beauty required perfection, that her arthritic hands could only produce inferior work. But this mother had seen a different kind of beauty, the beauty of creation despite limitation, of persistence through difficulty, of love expressed through imperfect means. Chiyo returned to her loom with a new perspective. She stopped trying to create what her hands could no longer produce and started exploring what they could produce. The patterns that emerged were unlike anything she had made before. They were asymmetrical, organic, and marked by the randomness of her unpredictable hand movements. They told stories of struggle and adaptation, of beauty that included rather than denied imperfection. People noticed something profound in this new work. Her earlier pieces had been technically superior, but these new pieces touched something deeper. They were relatable in a way perfection never is. They spoke of being human, of limitations, of finding beauty not despite obstacles, but through them. "Your old work was impressive," one patron told her. "This new work is moving. I look at your perfect pieces and admire them. I look at these new pieces and feel understood." Chiyo began teaching again, but with a transformed philosophy. "I spent 30 years pursuing perfection," she would tell students. "I thought my value as a weaver came from my technical mastery. But arthritis stripped that away and showed me something more important. That beauty doesn't require perfection. That limitation can reveal new possibilities. That the work of imperfect hands can touch hearts in ways that perfect technique never could." She would show students her early work alongside her later work. "These first pieces show what skilled hands can do. These later pieces show what love can do with whatever hands you have. Which is more valuable?" The answer isn't obvious. Now, who had continued as her apprentice through all these changes, asked one day, "Do you wish you could have your old hands back? Do you miss being able to create perfectly?" Chiyo thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the ease of it," she said honestly. "I miss not feeling pain with every movement, but I don't miss who I was when perfection came easily." That Chiyo was skilled but narrow. She understood only one kind of beauty. This Chiyo, with her stiff, painful hands, understands more. "The arthritis took my technical perfection, but it gave me depth I never had before." She held up her gnarled hands. "These hands taught me what my young, nimble hands never could, that obstacles refine what truly matters. When I could create anything, I created what was impressive. Now that I can only create with difficulty, I create what's true." The limitation stripped away everything superficial and left only what's essential. Years passed, and Chiyo's hands grew worse. Eventually, she could barely work the loom at all. But by then, her teaching had become as valued as her weaving once was. She taught people to see obstacles not as endings, but as refinements, not as barriers, but as editors that remove what's unnecessary and reveal what's essential. "Every limitation is a teacher," she would say. "It shows you what really matters by taking away what doesn't." My hands took away my technical mastery and revealed that mastery was never the point. The point was always connection, expression, and the creation of beauty that touches hearts. I can do that with arthritic hands. I just had to learn a different language of beauty. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own limitations, your own obstacles, your own arthritic hands. What has been taken from you that felt essential? What can you no longer do that once defined you? These losses aren't just subtractions. They're refinements, removing what's superficial to reveal what's essential. Your obstacles are teaching you something. They're stripping away the easy answers, the impressive exteriors, the technical perfections that never touched anyone's heart anyway. What remains, what you can still do despite your limitations, that's what truly matters. That's where your real beauty lives. Rest now in acceptance of your arthritic hands, your imperfect instruments, your limited capacities. They're not preventing beauty. They're refining it, teaching it, revealing it in forms you never would have discovered through ease and perfection. The weaver's silent loom eventually spoke with more power than her perfect one ever did. Your limitations will teach you the same truth if you let them. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, Let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a famous garden known for its roses, there appeared one season a strange mutation, a rosebush with no thorns. The stems were completely smooth, the flowers beautiful, but there was no defense, no sharp points to protect the plant from being damaged. The gardener, a woman named Ayame, was fascinated by this thornless rose. She thought it was perfect, an improvement over regular roses. Who wouldn't want roses without thorns? Roses that you could handle freely, cut without care, and arrange without risk of being pricked. She took cuttings from the thornless rose and propagated them, creating a whole section of the garden filled with these defenseless plants. She was so proud of this achievement that she invited people from across the region to see her thornless roses. But within a few months, problems appeared. Deer, which usually avoided the thorny roses, ate the thornless ones freely. Insects that were discouraged by thorns colonized these plants without resistance. Careless visitors would grab handfuls of flowers, taking far more than they would have if thorns had made them cautious. Within a year, the thornless roses were struggling. They required constant human protection, constant intervention, constant care in ways that regular roses never needed. What had seemed like an improvement turned out to be a vulnerability, a visiting botanist explained to Ayame. The thorns weren't a flaw in the design. They were part of the wisdom of the design. The rose needs protection because it's beautiful and therefore desirable. The thorns say, "Appreciate me from a respectful distance. If you want my beauty, approach carefully with awareness. Without that protection, the rose is too vulnerable to survive." Ayame was defensive at first, but thorns hurt people. Wouldn't it be better to have roses without danger? Danger isn't the only reason for boundaries, the botanist replied. The thorns create an appropriate relationship. They don't prevent you from enjoying the rose. They just require you to be careful, to pay attention, to approach with awareness rather than grabbing carelessly. The thornless rose invites carelessness, and carelessness destroys it. Ayame began to see the thornless roses differently. What she had thought was an improvement was actually a mutation that made the plant unable to protect itself, and that inability to protect itself meant the plant couldn't thrive. She noticed similar patterns in human behavior. People who had no boundaries, no ability to say no, no thorns to protect themselves, often ended up depleted and taken advantage of. Like her thornless roses, they needed constant intervention to survive because they couldn't protect themselves naturally. The thorns aren't cruel, she told visitors who still admired the thornless roses. They're wisdom. They're the rose's way of teaching appropriate relationships. Approach with care. Take only what's offered. Respect the boundary between appreciation and consumption. The thornless rose can't teach this lesson, so it gets consumed. She stopped propagating the thornless mutation and let those plants live out their natural lifespan while caring for them extra carefully. When they eventually died, she didn't replace them. Her garden returned to thorny roses that could protect themselves, that invited careful appreciation rather than careless grabbing. Tonight, you might consider your own thorns, the boundaries you felt guilty about, the protections you've thought were unfriendly or unkind. the ways you've learned to say no, to keep an appropriate distance, to require others to approach you with care rather than carelessness. These aren't flaws, they're wisdom. They're what allow you to survive and thrive. Don't apologize for your thorns. They're part of your design, protecting what's most beautiful about you from being carelessly destroyed. In a bustling market town, there were two merchants who sold rice side by side. One was named Kenji, the other Taro. Both had successful businesses. Both were known throughout the region. But their approaches to business could not have been more different. Kenji used scales that he had carefully adjusted to weigh slightly in his favor. Not much, just enough that most customers wouldn't notice. Over the course of a year, this small deception added significantly to his profits. He told himself everyone did it, that it was just smart business, that customers expected to be cheated a little and factored it into their calculations. Taro, on the other hand, used scales that were calibrated perfectly. He would even add a bit extra to each purchase, telling customers, "Better to give too much than too little." His profits were smaller than Kenji's, but his conscience was clear. Kenji would mock Taro privately. "You're a fool," he would say. "You could be making so much more. The customers don't know the difference. Why cheat yourself?" "I'm not cheating myself," Taro would reply. "I'm paying myself in peace of mind. Every transaction I make, I know I've been honest. That's worth more to me than extra profit." "Peace of mind doesn't feed your family," Kenji scoffed. "Money feeds your family." For years this continued. Kenji's business appeared more successful. He had a larger house, finer clothes, and more luxuries. Taro lived modestly, comfortable, but not wealthy. To outside observers, Kenji's approach seemed vindicated. Then one day, a wealthy lord came to the market to purchase rice for his household. He was known for being meticulous and for testing merchants' honesty. He had brought his own perfectly calibrated scales. He went first to Kenji's stall and purchased a measure of rice. Then he weighed it on his own scales. The shortage was immediately apparent. "Your scales are dishonest," the lord said coldly. Kenji's face went white. "My lord, there must be some mistake." "Perhaps your scales are inaccurate." "My scales are tested regularly by the Imperial Standards Office," the lord replied. "Yours are deliberately fraudulent. Not only will I not purchase from you, but I will ensure that everyone in my household and in my social circle knows of your dishonesty." The lord then went to Taro's stall and made the same purchase. When he weighed it on his own scales, he found that Taro had actually given more than the agreed upon amount. "Your scales are generous," the lord said with approval. "I prefer to err on the side of giving too much," Taro replied simply. "Then you have earned my business and my recommendation," the lord said. "From now on, all the rice for my household will be purchased from you, and I will tell others of your integrity." Within weeks, Taro's business had doubled, then tripled. The lord's recommendation brought customers from the wealthiest families in the region. Meanwhile, Kenji's business collapsed. Once word spread about his dishonest scales, even his regular customers stopped coming. His reputation destroyed, he eventually had to close his stall. Years later, Kenji came to Taro, humbled and seeking work. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought honesty was expensive, but dishonesty cost me everything." Taro hired him, but on one condition: That Kenji helped maintain the scales, calibrating them regularly to ensure perfect accuracy. You need to rebuild your relationship with honesty, Taro said. Start here, with these scales. Every time you calibrate them, remember that integrity isn't about what others can see. It's about what you know about yourself. As Kenji worked with the honest scales day after day, something shifted in him. He had spent so many years cheating in small ways that he had forgotten what it felt like to be completely honest. The dishonesty had eaten at him in ways he hadn't even recognized, creating a constant low-level anxiety about being discovered, a subtle shame he carried everywhere. Now, working with honest scales, treating every customer fairly, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Simple peace. No anxiety about being caught. No shame about his methods. No exhausting mental calculations about how much he could get away with. One day, a customer accidentally gave him too much money. The old Kenji would have pocketed it without comment. But now, without even thinking, he called the customer back and returned the extra coins. "You've changed," Taro observed, watching this exchange. "I'm remembering who I was before I started cheating," Kenji replied. "I forgot that honesty feels good, that it's actually easier than dishonesty because you don't have to remember your lies or worry about being discovered. I thought I was taking a shortcut to success, but I was actually taking a shortcut to misery." He looked at the scales, perfectly balanced. These scales are the most honest thing in this market. They don't calculate or scheme or try to get away with anything. They just measure truly. I spent years being more clever than these scales and less wise. Taro nodded. The scales teach a simple lesson. Integrity is its own reward. Not because good things always happen to honest people, but because living with integrity creates internal peace that no amount of profit gained through dishonesty can match. You sleep better. You walk lighter. You meet people's eyes without flinching. These things have value that can't be measured in coins. A young merchant who was just starting came to Taro for advice. "Everyone says I should adjust my scales just a little, that it's how business is done. But it feels wrong. What should I do?" Taro had Kenji answer. "I spent 20 years cheating," Kenji said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to restore the character I damaged in myself. The extra profit wasn't worth it. Not even close. Your scales are a mirror of your character. Keep them honest, and you keep yourself honest. Cheat them, and you cheat yourself in ways that matter far more than money." The young merchant looked at Kenji with curiosity. "But didn't you make more money by cheating?" "For a while," Kenji admitted. "But I lost it all when my dishonesty was discovered. More importantly, I lost something that took much longer to rebuild. My ability to respect myself. Every time I looked in a mirror, I saw a cheat. Every time I counted my profits, I knew they were partly stolen. Every interaction with customers involved acting, pretending, and hiding what I really was. It was exhausting and corrosive." He gestured to the perfectly balanced scales. "These scales are at peace. They have nothing to hide, nothing to defend, nothing to remember or cover up. They just are what they are. That's what integrity gives you. The peace of being what you are without pretense or deception. It's the most valuable thing I've learned, and I learned it the hard way." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own scales. Where in your life are you adjusting the balance, even slightly, in your own favor? Where are you being less than completely honest with others or with yourself? These small dishonesties might seem insignificant, but they accumulate. They create a background noise of anxiety and shame that you carry everywhere. What would it feel like to calibrate your scales perfectly? To be completely honest, even when no one is watching, even when you could get away with a small deception. Not because of fear of being caught, but because integrity itself is the reward. Because living with honest scales creates an internal peace that no amount of clever advantage taking can provide. Rest tonight in honesty. Let go of all the small ways you've been adjusting the scales. Let go of the exhausting mental work of maintaining deceptions. Be like the perfectly balanced scale, true, honest, at peace with what you are. The reward isn't somewhere in the future. The reward is the immediate relief of no longer having to hide, to calculate, to worry about being discovered. Honest scales don't lie awake at night. Neither do honest hearts. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In the capital city lived a tea master named Soho, who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of the tea ceremony. His movements were flawless, his timing exact, his aesthetic sense refined beyond what most people could achieve in several lifetimes. Every detail of his ceremonies was considered and precise. The angle of the bowl, the temperature of the water, the moment to pass the tea, the positioning of each implement. Soho's ceremonies were legendary. People would wait years for an invitation to attend. Wealthy patrons offered fortunes to have Soho perform ceremonies for their guests. Other tea masters studied his techniques, trying to replicate his perfection. But Soho himself had grown troubled. Despite his technical mastery, despite the acclaim, he felt his ceremonies had become performances rather than genuine expressions of tea mind. He was so focused on executing each movement perfectly that he had lost connection to the spirit beneath the movements. His ceremonies were flawless, but somehow empty. On his 70th birthday, Soho decided to retire from public ceremonies. He would perform one final tea ceremony, a farewell to his long career, and then step away to live simply in a small temple. He prepared meticulously for this final ceremony. He invited only his closest students and a few respected elders who had followed his work for decades. He selected implements he had used for years, choosing each for its history and meaning. He practiced the movements daily in the weeks leading up to the ceremony, ensuring everything would be perfect. The day of the ceremony arrived. Soho entered the tea room with his usual grace, began with his usual precision. His guests watched in respectful silence, knowing they were witnessing a master's final performance. Then, midway through the ceremony, something unexpected happened. As Soho reached for the tea bowl, his hand trembled slightly. Whether from age, emotion, or simple nervousness, he couldn't say. The tremor caused him to fumble the bowl. It didn't fall or break, but his grip was clumsy, his movement awkward. The flow of the ceremony was disrupted by this imperfect moment. Soho's first instinct was mortification. After 50 years of perfect execution, his final ceremony was marred by a clumsy mistake. But then something shifted in him. The mistake had broken his focus on perfection, And in that break, he suddenly felt present in a way he hadn't been during a ceremony in years. He picked up the bowl, not with perfect grace, but with simple honesty, with the actual movement of an old man holding a bowl. He continued the ceremony, but something had changed. He was no longer performing perfectly. He was just making tea, sharing tea, being present with his guests. The movements that followed weren't as technically flawless as usual, but they had a quality his perfect performances had lacked. They were real. They were Soho actually being here, making tea, connecting with his guests, rather than Soho executing a perfect reproduction of the tea master role. When the ceremony ended, there was a long silence. Then one of the elder guests spoke. "That was the finest tea ceremony I have ever experienced." Soho was confused. "But I made mistakes." "The execution wasn't clean." "The execution was finally clean," the elder replied. "Clean of performance, clean of ego, clean of the need to be perfect. For the first time in decades, I saw you actually making tea rather than demonstrating how tea should be made. Your fumble was the most important moment of the ceremony. It dropped you out of performance and into presence." Another guest agreed. "I've attended 6 of your ceremonies over the years. They were all technically superior to today's, but this one touched me in a way the others never did. The imperfection made it human. It made it real. It made it about tea rather than about perfection." Soho sat with this feedback for a long time. He realized that his 50-year pursuit of perfect execution had taken him away from genuine expression. He had become so skilled at performing the tea ceremony that he had forgotten how to simply make tea with presence and care. "I thought mastery meant perfect execution," Soho told his students later. "I thought the goal was to perform each movement so exactly that no flaw could be found. But that kind of mastery is dead. It's impressive, but not alive. Today, when I fumbled and had to let go of perfection, I finally rediscovered what tea ceremony is actually about. Presence, connection, the simple act of sharing tea with other humans." He looked at his hands, still slightly trembling. "These old hands that made a mistake taught me more than 50 years of perfect practice. They taught me that perfect execution becomes perfect only when you stop trying to perfect it, when you let go of performance and sink into presence." One student asked, "So should we not practice? Should we not work toward technical excellence?" "Practice," Soho replied. "Develop your technique. But don't let technique become an end in itself. Practice until the movements are natural, then let go of trying to perform them perfectly. Use your technique to support presence, not to replace it. Master the form so completely that you can forget the form and just be here, making tea." He picked up a tea bowl, holding it with the same slight tremble. "See this imperfection? This is actually perfection because it's real. It's an old man's hand actually holding a bowl. The steady, flawless grip I cultivated for decades was impressive, but it was also a kind of lie it hid my actual hand behind a perfect performance. This trembling hand is honest, and honesty is more important than perfection." In the weeks following his final ceremony, Soho began making tea in a completely different way. He still had all his technical skills, all his aesthetic sensitivity, but he used them lightly, allowing imperfection, welcoming the unexpected, staying present with what was actually happening rather than executing a mental script. He made tea for strangers, for children, for anyone who wanted to share a bowl. These weren't formal ceremonies with guests and perfect settings. They were just tea, made with care, shared with presence. And people felt more touched by these simple offerings than they had by his legendary perfect ceremonies. "You've become a greater tea master by letting go of mastery," one visitor observed. "I've become an actual tea master by letting go of the performance of mastery," Soho clarified. "I was skilled before, but I wasn't real. Now I'm both skilled and real. The skill supports the reality rather than replacing it. That's the difference." A young tea student struggling to perfect his own technique asked Soho for guidance. "How do I know when my practice is good enough? When can I stop trying to perfect my movements? When perfection becomes a barrier rather than a path," Soho replied. "Practice until the movements are natural and trustworthy. Then let go of trying to make them perfect and just let them be. The movement from practice to performance to presence, that's the journey. Most people stop at performance, endlessly perfecting their execution. The final step is letting go of perfection and discovering presence." He made tea for the young student, his hands moving with practiced skill, but also with slight tremors, small imperfections, human reality. "See how I make tea now? I'm not performing or demonstrating, I'm just making tea. The years of practice allow me to do it well, but letting go of perfection allows me to do it truly. Both are necessary, but the second is what makes it complete. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you've been perfecting, performing, trying to execute flawlessly. What would happen if you let your hands tremble slightly? If you allowed imperfection? If you stopped performing mastery and just did the thing itself, present and real? Perfect execution is impressive, but presence is what actually connects, what actually matters, what actually makes any practice complete. You've practiced enough, you've refined enough. Now it's time to let go of perfection and discover what's on the other side. Not sloppiness, not carelessness, but genuine presence that includes both skill and imperfection, both mastery and humanity. Rest now in this completion. Let yourself fumble slightly. Let yourself be real rather than perfect. The Tea Master's Last Cup teaches that the journey ends not in flawless execution, but in authentic presence. You've arrived, not at perfection, but at something better, yourself, skilled and real, doing what you do with care and presence, and the slight tremble of actual human hands. That's perfection. That's the completion. That's the teaching. Sleep now, no longer performing, just being. This is enough. You are enough. The perfect becomes perfect when you stop trying to perfect it. On a mountainside where strong winds blew constantly from the west, there grew a forest of pine trees. Most of the trees had learned to grow straight despite the wind, their trunks vertical, their branches reaching skyward. It was what trees were supposed to do after all, grow up toward the light. But there was one tree that grew differently. From its earliest days as a sapling, this tree had bent toward the east, growing almost horizontally rather than vertically. Its trunk ran parallel to the ground for several feet before curving upward. Its branches spread in unusual directions, creating a shape unlike any other tree in the forest. The other trees, if trees could speak, might have considered this tree malformed. It wasn't doing what trees were supposed to do. It wasn't following the pattern that all the other trees followed. It was crooked, bent, wrong. A woodcutter named Jin would come to this forest regularly to select trees for timber. He always chose the straightest, tallest trees. Trees with vertical trunks that would yield straight boards. Trees that had grown properly. He would walk past the sideways growing tree without even considering it. What use was a tree that grew horizontally? It couldn't be milled into straight lumber. It was a waste of space in the forest, taking up ground where a proper tree could grow. Years passed. The sideways tree continued its unusual growth, seemingly unbothered by its difference from the other trees. It didn't try to straighten itself or grow more vertically. It simply continued being what it was, spreading its branches in its own unique pattern. One day, a master boat builder named Keiko came to the forest. She was looking for wood to build a special ship, one that would need to navigate difficult coastal waters. She needed timber with particular curves, wood that could form the ribs and hull of a vessel that would bend with the waves rather than fight against them. She walked through the forest, examining tree after tree. The straight, vertical ones were impressive, certainly. Well formed, exactly what most people wanted. But they weren't what she needed. Then she saw the sideways growing tree. She stopped and stared. Jin the woodcutter happened to be nearby. "Don't waste your time with that one," he called out. "It's malformed, useless for lumber." But Keiko approached the tree slowly, running her hands along its horizontal trunk, examining the unusual curves of its branches. "This tree," she said quietly, "this tree is exactly what I need. These curves are perfect for a ship's hull. This horizontal strength is ideal for bearing the weight of a deck. This unusual growth pattern that you call useless is actually precious. This tree has exactly the qualities I've been searching for." She turned to Jin. "You've been walking past treasure because you were only looking for what trees usually look like. But sometimes the unusual one, the different one, the one that doesn't fit the standard pattern, that's the one with the most value. Just for a different purpose than you imagined." Jin helped Keiko harvest the sideways tree, and he watched as she worked with the wood. Every unusual curve, every strange angle, every part that would have been useless for straight boards turned out to be perfect for the ship's construction. The tree's horizontal trunk became the keel. Its curved branches became the ribs. Its unusual shape, which had made it worthless for Jin's purposes, made it invaluable for Keiko's. The ship that was built from that tree became legendary. It handled rough seas better than ships built from straight timber. It flexed with the waves rather than fighting them. It had a strength that came not from rigid straightness, but from curved resilience. Years later, when Jin told this story, he would say, "I learned something from that tree. I had been judging it by one standard. Could it give me straight boards? When it couldn't, I dismissed it as worthless. But it wasn't worthless. It was just designed for a different purpose, one I couldn't see because I was only looking for what I expected trees to be." He would walk people through the forest and point out other unusual trees. "See that one with the split trunk?" Most people would call it damaged, but a furniture maker could create something extraordinary from those two main branches. That one there that's gnarled and twisted. Useless for construction lumber, but a carver could make sculptures from it that straight wood could never achieve. Each tree is growing its own way, and each way has value for someone who can see it. The sideways tree's story spread beyond that forest. It became a teaching that parents would share with children who felt different, who didn't fit the standard pattern, who grew in unusual ways. "You're not wrong," parents would say to a child who struggled in conventional schools but showed brilliance in other areas. "You're not broken," they would say to a child who couldn't sit still but had extraordinary physical abilities. "You're like the sideways tree, growing in your own direction, and someday someone will come along who needs exactly what you are, who sees that your difference is not a flaw, but a gift." A young woman named Yuri heard this story when she was struggling with feeling like she didn't fit anywhere. She wasn't good at the things her family valued. She didn't have the skills her community praised. She felt broken, wrong, useless. But the story of the sideways tree changed something in her understanding. What if she wasn't failing to be what others expected? What if she was succeeding at being what she actually was, and she just hadn't found the place where that was valued yet? She stopped trying to force herself into shapes that didn't fit her nature. She stopped judging herself by standards that didn't account for her particular gifts. She simply continued growing in her own direction, trusting that somewhere, someone would need exactly what she was. And eventually, she found her place. Not in the conventional path her family had hoped for, but in work that required exactly her unusual combination of skills and perspectives. What had seemed like weaknesses in one context became strengths in another. What had seemed like failure to grow properly was actually success at growing authentically. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the ways you've judged yourself for not growing straight, for not fitting the standard pattern, for being different from what seems normal or expected. What if those differences aren't flaws? What if you're like the sideways tree, growing exactly as you should, waiting for the boat builder who needs precisely your unique shape? You don't have to force yourself into a form that doesn't fit your nature. You don't have to straighten what grows curved or vertically climb when you naturally spread horizontally. Your path is your own. Your shape is your own. And somewhere, someone needs exactly what you are, not despite your differences, but because of them. Rest now in acceptance of your own unique growth pattern. You're not wrong. You're not broken. You're just different. And different is not less than. It's just different. Let yourself grow in your own direction and trust that your unusual shape has value, even if you can't see it yet. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. In a city famous for its artists, there was a renowned sculptor named Kaori who had created magnificent works for temples, palaces, and public squares throughout the land. She was known for her perfectionism, her unwillingness to declare any work complete until every detail was exactly right. At age 60, Kaori received a commission that she knew would be her masterpiece, a memorial sculpture for the city's founder. She had complete artistic freedom and unlimited time. This would be her legacy, the work by which all her other work would be judged. She began with intense focus, creating preliminary sketches, building models, and selecting the perfect stone. The first year was spent in planning, The second year is spent roughing out the basic form. By the third year, the sculpture was recognizably taking shape as a figure of dignity and strength, capturing something essential about leadership and vision. But as the sculpture neared completion, something strange happened. Kaori couldn't finish it. Every time she thought she was done, she would see another adjustment to make, another detail to refine, another element that wasn't quite right. The nose could be more precise, the hands could be more expressive, the drapery could flow more naturally. Years passed. The sculpture stood in her studio, nearly complete, but never quite complete enough. City officials would visit, would ask when they might see the finished work, and Kaori would assure them it was almost ready, just a few more refinements needed. 10 years after beginning the project, Kaori was still working on the same sculpture. It had gone through countless iterations. Areas she had refined years earlier, she would redo, claiming her skills had improved, and she could do better now. The sculpture had become an obsession, a project that consumed her life but never reached completion. A young sculptor named Isamu, who admired Kaori's earlier work, came to apprentice with her. He expected to learn from watching a master complete her masterpiece. Instead, he found an old woman trapped in endless refinement, unable to stop working on a sculpture that had been nearly done for years. "Why don't you declare it finished?" Isamu finally asked, after watching Kaori rework the same hand for the third time since he arrived. "Because it's not perfect yet," Kaori replied. "I can see the ideal form in my mind. This stone version still falls short. I need to keep working until the stone matches the vision." "But will it ever match?" Isamu asked gently. "Will the real sculpture ever match the perfect one in your imagination?" Kaori had no answer. She had never asked herself this question. She had always assumed that with enough work, enough refinement, enough time, she could make the physical sculpture match her mental ideal. A Zen teacher named Etsuko, who had known Kaori for decades, visited the studio. She looked at the nearly complete sculpture with a sad expression. "You're destroying it," Etsuko said. "I'm perfecting it," Kaori protested. "No, you're overworking it. The sculpture lost its life years ago when you couldn't stop refining it. Now it's becoming tight, over-controlled, anxious. I can see your perfectionism in every surface. The early spontaneity is gone, replaced by compulsive detail." She touched the sculpture gently. Completion doesn't mean achieving perfection. It means recognizing when continuing diminishes rather than improves. This sculpture was probably finished 5 years ago, but you couldn't see it because you were comparing it to an impossible ideal rather than accepting it as the real thing it actually was. Kaori wanted to argue, but she knew Etsuko was right. She looked at her sculpture with honest eyes for the first time in years. It was beautiful in parts, overworked in others. The areas she had refined most recently were actually worse than earlier versions. Too controlled, too fussy, too perfect. The sculpture had lost its breath somewhere along the way. "How do I know when something is done?" Kaori asked quietly. "How do I distinguish between stopping because it's complete and stopping because I've given up?" "You feel it," Etsuko replied. "True completion has a quality of rightness, even if the work isn't perfect. Giving up has a quality of defeat. But what you're doing now, is neither completion nor giving up. It's compulsive continuation, working past the point where work helps. That's different from both completion and abandonment. She looked at Kaori directly. The sculpture should have been installed in the city square years ago, where people would appreciate it. Instead, it's trapped in your studio, being endlessly refined toward an ideal it will never reach. You're preventing it from serving its purpose because you can't accept that it's good enough. That's not dedication to excellence. That's fear disguised as perfectionism. This truth landed hard. Kaori realized she had been afraid to finish the sculpture, afraid to have it judged, afraid it wouldn't live up to her reputation. As long as it remained unfinished in her studio, it remained perfect in potential. Once completed and installed, it would be real, subject to criticism, limited by its actual qualities rather than protected by its imagined ones. "I've been hiding," Kaori admitted, calling it refinement when actually it was avoidance. With Etsuko's help, Kaori looked at the sculpture one more time and made a decision. She declared it complete as it was, not perfect, but real. She stopped working on it and arranged for its installation. When the sculpture was finally revealed in the city square, public response was mixed. Some people loved it. Others thought it was good, but not as exceptional as they'd expected from a decade of work. Critics noted both its strengths and its weaknesses. It was not a perfect masterpiece. It was a good sculpture with both beautiful passages and overworked areas, a real work rather than an ideal one. And Kaori found unexpected peace in this. The sculpture was done, installed, serving its purpose. It wasn't perfect, but it was complete. It had moved from endless potential to limited actuality, and this movement was itself a kind of perfection. Not the perfection of flawless execution, but the perfection of genuine completion. "I spent 10 years trying to make it perfect," Kaori told Isamu, standing together, looking at the installed sculpture. "I should have spent 3 years making it good, and then accepted that good was enough. The extra 7 years didn't make it better, they just delayed it." Isamu asked, "But how will you know with your next work? How will you know when to stop?" "I'll try to recognize when I'm working from love versus working from fear," Kaori said. "When I'm working from love, I'm responding to the actual piece, helping it become itself. When I'm working from fear, I'm trying to make it match an impossible ideal, trying to protect myself from criticism or judgment. The work from fear doesn't improve the piece. It just makes it tighter, more controlled, more dead." She touched a rough area of the sculpture that she had always intended to smooth further. "See this? For years I planned to refine it, but now I see it gives texture, life, contrast. My perfectionism wanted to eliminate it, but actually it's one of the better parts. Sometimes what we think is incomplete is actually just real, and real includes roughness, includes elements that don't match the ideal." In her remaining years, Kaori created several more sculptures, and each one she completed more quickly than the last. She learned to recognize the moment when a work was done, not perfect, but complete. She learned that completion meant allowing the work to be what it actually was, rather than endlessly pushing it toward what it might ideally be. "My final work taught me that sometimes completion means stopping, not finishing," she told students. "Sometimes good enough is actually excellent, because continuing would diminish rather than improve. Sometimes the work is done when you can let it go, not when it's perfect. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what in your life needs completion rather than more refinement. What projects, relationships, phases, identities have you been endlessly working on, unable to declare them finished because they don't match your ideal? What would it mean to accept them as complete, as good enough, as done? Completion doesn't require perfection. It requires recognition that continuing is no longer serving the work or serving you. It requires courage to let the real thing exist, rather than protecting the imagined perfect thing by keeping it perpetually incomplete. Rest now in completion. Let yourself be done with some things, not because they're perfect, but because they're finished. Let yourself stop refining and start living with what actually is, rather than what might ideally be. The sculptor's final work teaches that holding on too long destroys as surely as letting go too early. Learn to recognize the difference. And then, when it's time, let go. At the edge of a village stood a house whose small garden received almost no direct sunlight. Tall buildings on either side cast shadows that leave the garden in shade for all but an hour each day. The previous owners had tried repeatedly to grow sun-loving flowers and vegetables, but everything either died or grew weak and spindly, stretching desperately toward the brief sliver of light. When Yuki moved into the house, neighbors warned her about the garden. "Nothing grows there," they said. "The shade is too deep. Better to pave it over and use it for storage." But Yuki looked at the shaded space differently. "It's not that nothing can grow here," she said. "It's that sun-loving plants can't grow here. The garden isn't bad. It's just suited for different things than the previous owners were trying to grow." She began researching plants that thrived in shade, ferns that loved the dim moisture, hostas with broad leaves that caught what little light appeared, shade-loving flowers that bloomed in muted colors, but with delicate beauty. Instead of fighting the garden's nature, she worked with it. Within a year, Yuki's shaded garden was lush and beautiful. It didn't look like sunny gardens with their bright flowers and robust vegetables. It had a different aesthetic, subtle, cool, mysterious. The greens were deeper, the flowers were more delicate. The whole space had a quality of quiet richness that sun-blasted gardens never achieved. Neighbors who had declared the space hopeless came to see what Yuki had created. They were amazed, though some were still dismissive. "It's pretty," one neighbor said, "but it's not a real garden. Real gardens have tomatoes and sunflowers and bright colors. Your garden is just making the best of bad conditions." "Are its conditions bad?" Yuki asked. "Or just different conditions?" "These ferns and hostas are barely surviving. They're thriving. They're doing exactly what they evolved to do in exactly the kind of environment they need. The previous owners failed because they tried to grow sun plants in shade. I'm succeeding because I'm growing shade plants in shade." She touched a particularly lush fern. "This plant would die in full sun. It needs shade. For this fern, my garden isn't difficult conditions, it's ideal conditions. The mistake is measuring all gardens by sun garden standards and calling everything else deficient." A young woman named Hannah, who lived nearby, was struck by this perspective. Hannah had always felt like she was growing in the shade in difficult circumstances that made the kind of success others achieved impossible for her. She had health issues that limited her energy. She lived in poverty, which restricted her opportunities. She lacked the family support that others took for granted. Everyone told her she needed to overcome these limitations, to find more light, to transform her difficult conditions into easier ones. But what if, like Yuki's garden, she just needed to stop trying to grow like a sun plant and instead discover how to thrive as a shade plant? She came to talk with Yuki about this idea. "I feel like I'm always failing," Hannah admitted, "because I can't achieve what healthy, wealthy people with family support achieve. I'm trying to grow tomatoes in shade, basically. But I don't know what the equivalent of shade plants would be for a human life." Yuki walked her through the garden, explaining her choices. "See how I chose plants that need less energy? That's like you choosing work that fits your energy levels rather than jobs that demand more than you can give. See how I selected plants that thrive in cool, moist conditions? That's like you finding strengths that develop specifically because of your limitations, not despite them." She pointed to a particularly beautiful shade flower. This would never survive in full sun. Its delicate petals would burn. But here, protected from harsh light, it blooms with a beauty that sun lovers can't achieve. Your limitations might protect you from certain kinds of harm while allowing you to develop qualities that people in easier conditions never develop. Hannah began to reconsider her entire life. What if she stopped measuring herself by sun garden standards? What if she found shade garden ways to thrive? She had deep empathy, probably developed through her own suffering. She had patience, learned through chronic illness. She had creativity in making do with little, born from poverty. These weren't consolation prizes for failing at normal success. These were actual strengths, shade plant qualities that were valuable in themselves. She started making different choices. She took a job that paid less, but required less energy, allowing her to work sustainably rather than constantly burning out. She developed friendships with others who lived in shade, creating community with people who understood difficult circumstances. She stopped apologizing for needing things that others didn't need, recognizing that shade plants legitimately need different care than sun plants. Word spread about Yuki's garden and the perspective it represented. People who felt they were growing in difficult conditions began to see themselves differently. A man with learning disabilities stopped trying to compete in academic environments and found work that used his practical intelligence. A woman with anxiety stopped forcing herself into high-stress social situations and built a life that honored her need for quiet. A family with limited income stopped feeling inadequate for not achieving wealth and found richness in their strong relationships. The shade garden teaching, as people began to call it, spread beyond individuals to organizations. A school started creating shade garden programs for students who couldn't thrive in standard classroom environments. A business developed positions specifically designed for people with limitations that made traditional jobs difficult. A community center created spaces for people who needed accommodations that mainstream spaces didn't provide. Not everyone appreciated this perspective. Some critics said it encouraged people to accept limitations rather than overcoming them. "You're telling people to give up," they argued, "to accept that they can't thrive in normal conditions rather than working to change their circumstances. Yuki would answer these critics by walking them through her garden. Look at these plants. Should they be working to become sun plants? Should they be trying to overcome their shade-thriving nature? Or should they be celebrated for being excellent at what they actually are? She would point to a struggling plant that needed more light. Sometimes you do need to change conditions. This plant is genuinely in the wrong place. It needs to be moved to a more light-filled place. But most of these plants, they're exactly where they should be, thriving in conditions that sun plants would call impossible. The question isn't whether to overcome all limitations. The question is whether your limitations are like shade for a shade plant, the right conditions for your actual nature, or like shade for a sun plant, wrong conditions that need to change. A teacher named Nobuo applied this to his classroom. He stopped trying to make all students thrive in the same way. He recognized that some students were sun plants who needed bright, fast-paced, competitive environments. Others were shade plants that needed quiet, slow, supportive conditions. Trying to make shade plant students compete in sun plant ways was as futile as trying to grow ferns in full sun. He created different pathways through his curriculum, different ways to demonstrate learning, and different environments within his classroom. And he found that students he had previously considered struggling were actually thriving. They just needed shade garden conditions to show what they could do. Years later, Yuki's garden became something of a pilgrimage site for people living in difficult circumstances. They would come to see that lushness was possible even in shade, that beauty didn't require ideal conditions, that thriving could look different from what sunny gardens showed. Yuki, now elderly, would sit in her garden talking with visitors. The hardest thing, she would tell them, is stopping comparing yourself to sun gardens. Stop measuring your lushness by their standards. Stop trying to be bright when your beauty is subtle. Once you accept that you're a shade garden, once you stop apologizing for it and start working with it, you discover possibilities you never knew existed. She would touch the ferns and hostas she had planted decades earlier, now mature and magnificent. These plants are barely surviving in bad conditions. They're thriving in ideal conditions for their nature. The shade isn't their obstacle, it's their element. And the same might be true for you. Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider the shade you're growing in. The difficult conditions you've been taught to see as obstacles might actually be the right environment for who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who sun gardens demand, but who you actually are. Stop trying to grow sun plants in shade. Stop measuring yourself by standards designed for different conditions. Start asking, what does thriving look like for a shade plant? What can I grow that loves these exact conditions? What beauty can emerge specifically because of these limitations, not despite them? Rest now in your shade garden. Let yourself be a fern, a hosta, a delicate shade flower. Stop burning yourself trying to bloom in full sun. Sink into the cool moisture of your actual conditions and discover what wants to grow there. Shade isn't a deficiency. It's just a different light. And different light creates different beauty. Trust that yours is worth growing. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In a monastery at the base of a great mountain, students gathered each year to receive teachings from the head monk. a man named Zenkai who was famous for his wisdom. Students would travel from across the country to ask him questions and receive his guidance. One year, a particularly arrogant young scholar arrived. He had studied Buddhism at several temples, read countless sutras, and believed himself quite learned. He came to test Zenkai, to see if this famous teacher truly deserved his reputation. "Master Zenkai," the scholar said, bowing with perfect form but little genuine respect, "I have a question about the teaching of emptiness. In the Heart Sutra, it says that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But in the Lotus Sutra, there seems to be a different interpretation. How do you reconcile these apparent contradictions?" Zenkai looked at the scholar for a long moment. Then he said, "What color is the mountain?" The scholar was confused by this response, which seemed to have nothing to do with his sophisticated question. "The mountain? It's grey? Brown? I don't see how that's relevant to my question about the sutras." "Look at the mountain more carefully," Zenkai said. "What color is it really?" Irritated, but willing to play along, the scholar looked at the mountain. "It's multiple colors: grey rock, brown earth, green trees, white snow on the peak. But master, this doesn't answer my question about the sutras." "In the morning light," Zenkai continued as if the scholar hadn't spoken, "the mountain appears pink and gold. In the evening light, it turns purple and deep blue. In fog, it vanishes completely. In moonlight, it becomes silver. So what color is the mountain?" "It depends on the light, the weather, the time of day," the scholar said impatiently. "But surely you're not suggesting that we ignore the profound philosophical questions raised by the sutras in favor of simple observations about scenery." "I'm suggesting," Zenkai said gently, "that you're asking the wrong question, or rather, you're asking the right question in the wrong way. You want me to give you an intellectually satisfying answer about emptiness that you can add to your collection of knowledge. But emptiness is not a concept to understand. It's a reality to experience." He stood up. "Come with me." Zenkai led the scholar outside and had him sit facing the mountain. "Stay here until you understand the mountain's answer," he said, and walked away. The scholar sat, confused and annoyed. This was not what he had come for. He wanted sophisticated discourse, not this simple sitting and looking. But Zenkai had set the task, and the scholar's pride wouldn't let him give up without trying. He sat there for hours, looking at the mountain. At first, his mind was full of arguments and analysis. He thought about the various sutras, about philosophical positions, about how he would describe this waste of time to his friends at the university. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The afternoon light changed. Clouds moved across the peak. A bird flew past. The mountain simply was, doing nothing, proving nothing, arguing nothing. It had no opinion about emptiness or form. It wasn't trying to be right or wrong. It was just mountain, completely present, completely itself. And sitting there, the scholar's busy mind began to quiet. His need to be right, to demonstrate his knowledge, to prove his intelligence, all of it started to seem less important. He was just a person sitting, looking at a mountain. No questions to answer, no position to defend. Just this moment of being present. As evening came, Zenkai returned. "Did the mountain answer your question?" The scholar was surprised to find he had tears in his eyes. The mountain showed me that I was so busy being right that I had forgotten how to simply be. I could quote sutras about emptiness, but I wasn't empty. I was full of myself, full of my knowledge, full of my need to demonstrate my understanding. The mountain doesn't try to understand itself, it just is. And in that isness, there's a kind of wisdom that all my study never touched. Zenkai nodded. You came here with the right answer to your question already prepared. You just wanted me to confirm it so you could feel superior. But I gave you a wrong answer, an irrelevant response about the color of a mountain, and that wrong answer taught you more than my right answer ever could. How so? The scholar asked. Because it frustrated your expectations. It pulled you out of your intellectual comfort zone. It made you sit with uncertainty and not knowing. It brought you into direct contact with reality instead of concepts about reality. Being right keeps you in your head. Being wrong, being confused, not knowing. These open you to actually learning something. The scholar stayed at the monastery for 3 months, not as a scholar testing a teacher, but as a genuine student. And during that time, he learned more than in all his years of study. He learned that wisdom isn't the accumulation of right answers, but the capacity to be present. He learned that understanding comes not from intellectual mastery, but from direct experience. One day, a new student arrived and asked Zenkai a complicated philosophical question. The student expected an elaborate answer, but Zenkai simply said, "What color is the mountain?" The new student looked confused, just as the scholar had. The scholar, who was nearby, smiled. He understood now. The master wasn't being cryptic or difficult. He was offering the most direct teaching possible. Stop trying to be right. Start being present. The answers you seek aren't in your head. They're in the direct experience of reality, which is always here, always available, like a mountain that needs no explanation for its being. Years later, when the former scholar had become a teacher himself, students would sometimes ask him complicated questions, showing off their learning, and he would remember Zenkai's method. Sometimes he would answer their question directly, but sometimes he would give them what appeared to be a wrong answer, an irrelevant response, something that would frustrate their expectation of being confirmed in their rightness. Being right is a prison, he would tell them when they complained. When you're sure you're right, you stop looking, stop questioning, stop being open to reality as it actually is. Sometimes the best teaching is the one that makes you wrong, that strips away your certainty, that leaves you not knowing. In that not knowing, real understanding becomes possible. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might notice all the ways you're trying to be right. Right about how you should relax, right about how sleep should come, right about what this experience should be like. What if you let go of being right? What if you allowed yourself to not know, to be uncertain, to be present to whatever this moment actually is, rather than what you think it should be? The mountain doesn't try to be the right kind of mountain. It is just a mountain, completely without self-consciousness or doubt. You don't need to be the right kind of person or rest the right way. You can just be completely, presently, without the burden of rightness. Let your certainty go. Let your need to understand go. Let yourself be wrong, confused, not knowing. And in that openness, rest comes naturally. like evening light on a mountain that never asked to be any particular color. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountain monastery lived an old abbess named Ren, who kept in her private chamber an unusual mirror. The mirror was ancient, its surface darkened and worn until it reflected almost nothing. Visitors who saw it would often remark on its uselessness. "Your mirror shows nothing," they would say. "Why keep it? Get a new one that actually works." But Ren treasured this mirror and looked into it every morning. "It shows me exactly what I need to see," she would reply, though she never explained what she meant. One day, a vain young woman named Ayame came to the monastery seeking spiritual guidance. She was beautiful and knew it, spending hours each day on her appearance, constantly checking her reflection in every available surface. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her looks. During her first meeting with Ren, Ayame couldn't stop glancing at the darkened mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of herself. But the mirror showed nothing, just a dark, murky surface with barely a hint of reflection. "Your mirror is broken," Ayame said with annoyance. "Don't you want to see yourself?" "I see myself perfectly well in this mirror," Ren replied. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." "Exactly," Ren said, and smiled. Ayame didn't understand, but as the days passed and she continued her stay at the monastery, she found herself repeatedly drawn to Ren's useless mirror. She would stand before it, searching for her reflection, finding almost nothing. It was deeply unsettling. Every other mirror showed her who she was, or at least showed her what she looked like. This mirror showed nothing. After a week, Ayame mentioned her frustration to Ren. "I hate your mirror. I keep looking into it hoping to see myself, but there's nothing there." "And what does that nothing teach you?" Ren asked. "That the mirror is broken." "Or that you're looking for the wrong thing," Ren suggested. "Every mirror you've ever looked into has shown you your face, your hair, your features. You've spent years studying that reflection, knowing exactly what you look like. My mirror can't show you that, so it forces you to consider, if you can't see your face, what else might you see? If appearance isn't available, what remains?" Ayame thought about this. When she looked into normal mirrors, she saw features she judged. Eyes too small, nose too sharp, skin not smooth enough. She saw an image she tried to perfect, control, improve. The looking was never really seeing. It was evaluating, criticizing, trying to manage how others would perceive her. But in Ren's dark mirror, there was nothing to evaluate, no features to judge, no appearance to control. Just dark surface and, if she looked very carefully, the barest hint of a form. Not details, just presence. "What do you see when you look in your mirror?" Ayame asked Ren. "Nothing that can be improved or criticized," Ren replied. "Nothing that age can diminish or beauty can enhance. Just the simple fact of being here, looking. The mirror that shows everything tempts you to judge what you see. The mirror that shows nothing releases you from judgment." She came to stand beside Ayame before the dark mirror. "Look at us now, standing here together. Can you see our faces?" "Barely," Ayame admitted. "Can you tell which of us is more beautiful?" No. Can you see our ages, our features, the details that usually define us? No. Then we stand equal before this mirror, Ren said. Not as beautiful or plain, young or old, but simply as two beings, present in this moment. The mirror that shows nothing strips away all the superficial ways we distinguish ourselves and leaves only the essential fact: we are here. Over the following weeks, Ayame found herself looking into Ren's mirror more than any of the clear mirrors in the monastery. At first, this puzzled her. Why would she choose the mirror that showed nothing? But gradually she understood. She was tired of the constant judgment that came with seeing her reflection clearly. Tired of always evaluating, always trying to improve, always wondering if she looked acceptable. The dark mirror gave her relief from all that. It let her be present without being perceived, even by herself. It let her exist without the burden of appearance. I think I'm beginning to understand, Ayame told Ren one morning. The mirror that shows nothing is actually showing me something very important. That I exist independent of how I look. That there's a me underneath or beyond appearance. I've spent so many years focused on my reflection that I forgot there's someone doing the looking. Ren nodded with satisfaction. The mirror that shows everything directs your attention outward, to surface and appearance. The mirror that shows nothing directs your attention inward, to the awareness that's looking. One mirror shows you an object to be evaluated. The other mirror reveals you as a subject who is aware. She touched the darkened surface gently. Most people think a mirror's value is in how clearly it reflects. But sometimes a mirror's greatest value is in what it doesn't show. The absence of reflection can teach what the presence of reflection never could. Ayame stayed at the monastery for 6 months, and during that time, her relationship with mirrors changed completely. She no longer felt compelled to check her reflection constantly. When she did look in clear mirrors, she no longer saw an image to be judged, but simply a face, no more or less significant than any other face. Your dark mirror freed me, she told Ren when she prepared to leave. I thought I needed to see myself clearly to know who I was, but actually, seeing myself clearly kept me trapped in appearance, in judgment, in the endless work of managing how I looked. Your mirror that showed nothing helped me discover the me that exists beyond appearance. After Ayame left, other students asked Ren about the mirror's teaching. Why not just remove all mirrors? One asked. If the point is to free people from attachment to appearance, why have mirrors at all? Because running from mirrors is still being controlled by them, Ren explained. The person who avoids all mirrors is as attached to appearance as the person who constantly looks. They're just attached to not looking rather than to looking. The dark mirror teaches something different. It teaches how to look without judgment, how to be aware of appearance without being enslaved by it. She held up the darkened mirror for the students to see. This mirror shows that appearance and essence are not the same. The clear mirror shows you appearance so clearly that you might mistake it for essence. This dark mirror removes appearance and asks, what remains? What are you when you can't see your face? That question leads to wisdom. A philosophical student asked, but isn't the dark mirror just another form of illusion? It hides reality rather than revealing it. Does it? Ren replied. The clear mirror shows you how light reflects off your features at this particular moment from this particular angle. Is that reality? Or is that also just one kind of information, one kind of seeing? The dark mirror shows you something the clear mirror can't. Your existence independent of your reflection. Both mirrors have their uses. The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from each what it has to teach. Years later, when Ren was dying, she gave the darkened mirror to her successor with specific instructions. Keep this mirror, even though students will mock it, even though visitors will offer to replace it. This mirror teaches what cannot be taught in words, that sometimes absence reveals more than presence, that sometimes nothing shows more than everything, that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from what we cannot see rather than from what we can. Tonight, as you rest, you might imagine looking into a mirror that shows nothing, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's teaching you something that clear mirrors never could. Without your reflection to evaluate and judge, what remains? Without your appearance to manage and improve, who are you? The mirror that shows nothing is inviting you to meet yourself beyond surface, beyond image, beyond all the ways you've learned to see yourself through others' eyes. In the dark mirror, there's just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of being here without needing to look any particular way. Rest now in the dark mirror's teaching. Let yourself be unseen, unreflected, undefined by appearance. Let yourself exist in the space beyond image, where judgment can't reach, where evaluation has no meaning, where you simply are without needing to be any particular way. The mirror shows nothing, and in that nothing, everything essential is revealed. Sleep in that revelation tonight. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. There was a monk named Ryusei who lived simply in a small temple at the edge of a town. He owned very little, just what was necessary for his practice and daily life. Among his few possessions was a pair of sturdy sandals he had received as a gift from his teacher when he first became a monk. They were well made, comfortable, and had served him faithfully for 7 years. One morning, Ryusei woke to discover his sandals were gone. Someone had stolen them during the night. He stood at the temple entrance, looking at the empty space where his shoes had been, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at the theft, worry about how he would afford new sandals on no income, sadness at losing a gift from his beloved teacher, attachment to these particular shoes that had carried him so many miles. As he stood there, a neighbor passed by and noticed his bare feet. "Ryusei-san, where are your shoes?" "Someone took them during the night," Ryusei replied. "What?" "That's terrible. You should report it to the magistrate. We can't have thieves in this neighborhood." But Ryusei shook his head slowly. No need to involve the magistrate. "But you need shoes!" "And the thief needs to be punished." Ryusei was quiet for a moment, watching the morning light spread across the ground. Then he said something that puzzled the neighbor. "I hope they fit him well." The night was cold. Perhaps his need for shoes was greater than mine. The neighbor went away confused, but Ryusei meant what he said. As he sat with his initial reactions of anger and loss, he began to examine them more carefully. Why was he so upset? because someone had taken something that belonged to him. But had it really belonged to him? He hadn't made the sandals himself. They had been given to him by his teacher, who had received them from someone else, who had purchased them from a craftsman who made them from materials that came from plants and animals, which came from the earth. At what point in this chain had the sandals become his? He had been using them, yes, they had been in his possession. But possession is temporary, always. Whether stolen, worn out, or outlived by his own death, those sandals were never going to be his permanently. They were just passing through his life for a time, and now they had passed on to someone else. This understanding brought a strange peace. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, Ryusei found himself thinking about the person who had taken the shoes. What desperation drives someone to steal shoes from a poor monk? What circumstances had brought them to this temple in the middle of the night, in need of footwear? Ryusei spent the day walking barefoot, which he hadn't done since childhood. He noticed things he never noticed while wearing shoes. The texture of different surfaces beneath his feet. The temperature of stones that had been in sun versus shade. The careful attention required to avoid sharp objects. The humility of going barefoot while others wore shoes. That evening, another monk from a neighboring temple visited. Hearing about the stolen sandals, he immediately offered Ryusei a spare pair he had. Ryusei accepted gratefully, but he noticed something. If he had spent the whole day angry about the theft, bitter about his loss, he would have missed the insights that came from walking barefoot. He would have missed the kindness of this monk's offering. He would have poisoned his whole day with resentment over something that was already gone and couldn't be changed. Instead, by letting go of attachment to the stolen shoes, by wishing well for the thief, by being present to what actually was rather than resenting what was no longer, he had passed the day in relative peace. A student who heard this story asked Ryusei, "But Master, didn't you feel angry? Isn't anger at injustice natural?" "Of course I felt angry," Ryusei replied. For about 10 minutes, anger arose, just as it arises for anyone when something is taken from them. But then I had a choice. I could feed that anger, nurture it, build stories around it, carry it with me all day, letting it poison my mind and disturb my peace. Or I could acknowledge it, let it pass, and choose a different relationship with what had happened. "But the thief should be punished," the student insisted. "What he did was wrong. Perhaps he will be punished by his own conscience," Ryusei said. "Perhaps he is punished already by whatever circumstances drove him to steal from a poor monk. But whether he is punished or not is not my concern. My concern is whether I will punish myself by holding resentment or free myself by letting go." He looked at his new sandals, the gift from his fellow monk. "These shoes came to me because those shoes left me. If I had been so attached to the old shoes that I refused to accept new ones, I would still be barefoot." Life is constantly taking things from us and giving things to us. We suffer when we cling too tightly to what's being taken, and when we refuse to receive what's being offered. The student was quiet, thinking about this teaching. Finally, he asked, "So you're saying we shouldn't care about our possessions? We should just let people take whatever they want?" "I'm saying we should hold our possessions lightly," Ryusei replied. "Use them while we have them, appreciate them, but know that we never truly own anything. Everything we think we possess is just temporarily in our care. When it leaves us, whether through loss or theft or natural decay, we can let it go without adding the suffering of clinging to the simple fact of its absence. He smiled, remembering the cold night when his shoes were taken. That thief taught me something valuable. He showed me how attached I was to those sandals, how much of my sense of security was tied to possessions. He gave me an opportunity to practice letting go. In a way, though it wasn't his intention, he gave me a gift even as he took something from me. Years later, Rousseau would tell people, "The shoes I lost mattered less than what I learned by losing them. The thief took my sandals, but gave me a teaching about non-attachment. Most of what we think we own, we don't. Most of what we think we need, we don't. And most of what we think would destroy us to lose, we can actually live without quite peacefully." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you're holding too tightly. What possessions, what relationships, what ideas, what version of yourself are you clinging to, fearing their loss? What if you held these things the way Ryusei learned to hold his sandals? With appreciation while they're present, with acceptance when they leave. Nothing you possess is truly yours to keep. Everything is temporary, passing through your life for a time. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy these things or care for them. It means you don't have to suffer when they inevitably pass on. Rest now in empty hands, knowing that holding loosely allows life to flow through your grasp. What needs to stay will stay. What needs to go will go. And you can be at peace either way, not because you don't care, but because you understand that ownership was always an illusion and loss was always inevitable. Let go tonight of everything you've been trying so hard to hold onto, and notice how light your hands feel when they're finally open. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.